It's Typewriter Tuesday. Let's journey into the past to see what writers of old used to use to ply their trade. What kind of mechanical beauty does Al have for us this week?
Greetings and welcome back to Typewriter Tuesday. I'm Alton Gansky, author and typewriter collector. And I'm glad that you joined me today in my office. Today we have in front of us a fascinating little typewriter called a Remington Rand. It's based on a Model 5. It's deluxe and it's noiseless, and I will explain the others. Obviously no typewriter is noiseless, but it's called a noiseless typewriter. And it is, it's a bit of a beauty. It's got a two-tone gray, sort of battleship gray on it, with bakelite keys. In this particular case, the keys are nicely spaced, the action is good, and it uses a special type of type bar mechanism, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute. But as you can see, there's two tones. We've got a nice dark, almost black gray here with a lighter gray accent at the top. Usual kind of chrome stuff that you get with some of these typewriters. And panel that conceals some of the operation behind it, which we will talk about. This is a US-made Remington Rand. Later, they would go, they'd start building some of these for Europe, and they would be in Scotland doing that. It's very sleek styling. It's not the Art Deco that we've been seeing, because this is 1948, and during the years before, Remington had been involved in war support for the United States military. In fact, you can find some models of this particular typewriter in it's kind of an off-white, and it says U.S. Navy in the front. And what a lot of people don't realize is when the war started, when we entered the war, the United States entered the war, the military collected typewriters for people willing to donate them to the cause. And one of the reasons is typewriter companies were gearing up to produce things like ammunition, weapons, and the like. And Remington, of course, from the Remington rifle and so on, was perfectly suited for that. So typewriter manufacture was very limited, though some were made especially, I think, for the military, or they used older models and just changed them for it. Sometimes when you're a collector, interesting things happen. You meet some interesting people. This typewriter came to me in perhaps the most unusual way of any typewriter that I have. I had just purchased another typewriter from an antique store, and I was walking down the street, headed back to the car, and I was carrying it in its case. I don't remember which typewriter it was, but typewriters have very unique cases. Most people don't know how to recognize a typewriter case. The quickest way to recognize it is that it has a thick part of the case and a very thin part. And the thin part is what the typewriter sits on, and most typewriter cases were designed that you could open the top, which would cover the typewriter itself, unhinge it, that is, you just slip it off, and then you have a base that you could put on your lap if you're dealing with a portable. So the top and the bottom are very different widths, and that's one way to recognize them, which is good to know if you're trying to collect typewriters, because sometimes the stores don't know what to do with the typewriter or how to display it, so they just set the case down and hope somebody trips over it. And some of the best finds I have found have been typewriters locked away in their cases and stuck beneath a shelf somewhere. I was walking down the street when someone walked up to me and said, "Is that a typewriter case?" Well, it had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. So I was a little stunned by it, and I said that it was, and we started chatting a little bit, and she says, I have an old typewriter that came into the family a while back, and I'm thinking about selling it. As often is the case, she couldn't remember the brand name. I think she did remember it was a Remington, but that's all she remembered about it. And we ended up exchanging phone numbers, and a couple of weeks later, and $100 out of my checking account, I brought this little beauty home. Its biggest problem was that it was dirty, and that's to be expected when you're dealing with something from 1948, so I wasn't too disappointed with that. This typewriter is a great typewriter. It has a little different design. And many Remingtons from the same era are made of the same mechanism, put together the same way, but the bodies are a little different with that. In fact, the manual for this typewriter has 3 or 4 other typewriter models in it. They just used one user's manual for the entire line. Well, let me give you a quick tour of this. One of the things that makes this typewriter interesting is the way in which it types. And you can see the type bar coming up here. Normally in the little older typewriters, when you push on the key, it was a very simple lever mechanism that would send the type bar to the paper. The ribbon hits the paper's on the platen, and so it would leave an impression, and you would get this whack, 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 which is fine if you're alone in a room typing. If you're typing in a room with 100 other typists, then it's deafening. So the big move in typewriters was to make silent typewriters, which again isn't really the case. You can't have a silent manual typewriter, but they created ways that lessen the noise. I once saw from the Sears Roebuck catalog a photo of the ladies, and I think there was over 100 of them sitting in a giant room filling out order forms that had to be typed, and I could not imagine how loud that room must be. If you have 100 people pounding on old typewriters, it had to be deafening. But nonetheless, they did that. Well, what they did on these was a very unique thing to do. And as you can see in this picture that I'm showing you here, the type bar is geared. And so instead of just going up and smacking the paper, it goes up and presses the paper. That is, it presses the ink onto the page, and it is less noisy than most typewriters. It also gives you very even type, very consistent type, good spacing, all of those things. So that was pretty nifty. Fascinating little design, kind of streamlined. We're getting close to the 50s. We're going to get into all the futuristic type of designs and cars and houses and other such things. This has a regulator, and this is really a tension regulator. You can set it to 1, which makes the typing easier. So if you have weak kinds of fingers, or just not used to typing, you can do that, and you can go all the way up to a number 5, which is a little stiffer for those who have mighty fingers and want to pound the keys really hard. So along with that, they have an early form of plastic here that was still available after the war. Bakelite, you might think of Bakelite radios. And it has a good set of keys. No number 1, no exclamation mark, and it doesn't have a true tab as we would think of tabs. It has what they called a self-starter. And a self-starter is a set of tabs spaced 5 characters wide, and they're preset. You don't change them. You don't have to dig into the back or do anything like that to set your tabs, or in later models they would have keys on the front that you could do that. It just tabs 5 spaces. So it's 5 spaces wherever you are in it. And that's really, for most people, fine. You're going to indent a paragraph, that's really all you need is the 5 spaces with that, and keeps you from having to space using the space bar. But if you're having to do a lot of tabulation, then it can be a bit of a problem, and you'd have to set up your paperwork so it's 5 spaces apart or 10, some increment of 5. But nonetheless, it was pretty creative way to go. So we have the special type bars. We have the interesting round keys that are dished. Feel very comfortable to type with. A margin release that isn't marked. It's just a gray color to match the top, but not the keys, and so you can get a nice margin release, and of course a backspace key, which we all need when we type. One of the other great little items are these knurled knobs. There's one on each side. There's one here, and on the other side there's one here. And these are ribbon controls. If you turn them, it tightens the ribbon. So sometimes ribbons get hung up and they get a little wavy there, and you could just give it a little twist, it tightens it right up. If you push on it, it changes the direction of the ribbon. So instead of going from left to right, it'll go then right to left. And so it's great little control right at the fingertips, very good. Notice no paper bail on the front. It's using very simple paper fingers, no rollers on them. And that's really all you have, that and the center support with that. Very nifty. The probably only complaint someone could have with this is that if you want to set the margins, you have to open the back. And it's going to be a little difficult to see here because of the lighting, but in this back, there are margin releases and settings. Very easy to use, and they roll on rollers, and there's a sort of a geared track that you can move them to. And so it's not really that difficult to do, and then they hide it. So people sitting on the other side of your desk don't have to look into the back of your typewriter. This hole here is not original. Whoever had the typewriter originally decided they wanted a pop-up paper support, and so they took one off another typewriter and drilled a hole and screwed it in there. You'll also find these if you ever begin to collect typewriters, and these are typewriter repair shops. They always love to put their stickers, which are sometimes very difficult to remove, if not impossible, on the typewriter so that you would call them first. Sometimes they put them right at the top. I have typewriters that have them right at the front, so you have to look at it every day. I'm not a big fan of that, but I understand the need to try to pick up some business. So it's not unusual to see these on the side of a typewriter. Well, there we have it. We have a 1948 Remington Rand, which is a Model 5 based typewriter, and in gray post-war years. So typewriters are coming back into the mainstream now, and these companies, Royal and some of the others, are back in business doing the thing they set out to do, and that was to make the typewriters. Well, once again, I'm Alton Gansky, author and typewriter addict. I want to thank you for joining us for episode 10 of Typewriter Tuesday. Be sure and visit altongansky.com, or you can see other videos there or on youtube.com/Alton Gansky. Once again, thank you for being here.